Hello everyone, this is the Daydream Rules podcast and I'm Yarrow. Thank you so much for tuning in again this week. I'm really happy that I can bring you this beautiful conversation with Adrienne Sloan. I really hope that it offers you some comfort and some joy and just something soft to listen to as you go about your day. We talked about reclaiming a connection to our ancestors, about small daily rituals, staying present with grief, and finding comfort in these times of uncertainty. And we also spoke about what animism means to Adrienne, which I always think is so beautiful and interesting to hear about from different people. So before I go on to the show, I just want to say that I'm still on my Instagram break because I'm finalizing my book. It's going really well. I'm extremely excited about it. It's called Rituals, Simple and Radical Practices for Times of Crisis. And it's going to be a small, hopefully pretty inclusive and accessible book of stories and practices that you can kind of try and make your own. So I hope that it will provide like a framework for you to explore your own ritual practice. And I'm hoping to publish this at the very beginning of July for Patreons first. So you can become a patron at any level. You'll receive a digital copy as well as access to all my programs and recordings and my other zines. So yeah, there's a lot that you can get as a Patreon, and I really, really appreciate the support because it makes the show possible. It means I have a little bit more stable income and I get more space and time to create things for you, which is such a joy. I also want to say that I fully support the protest against police violence. I'm horrified that another Black man has died, and I think it is important that I speak about that. I really want to express my support and solidarity for this movement. I was considering coming back on Instagram to share about this, but if I'm really honest, in a way that would have felt maybe performative to me. And I just need a little bit of a break from social media at the moment, but I just want to say that doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about this. That doesn't mean that I'm not heartbroken. I am angry and sad, and I'm really committed to understanding and dismantling my own, the ways that I really benefit from white supremacy as a white person. And just to say that this is happening, I am in full support of this movement, and I really hope that this year is a moment of change, of long-lasting change, and that we are gonna get away from these cycles of responding to crisis or to death or grief in the moment and then let things die back down again. I think that we as white people really are required, it's time. It really is time. It's been way too long, and I just don't want this conversation to die back down again. I think we have to continue this, and I think it's the work of our lifetimes and not something that can just kind of come and go and ebb and flow. So yeah, just wanted to say that as well. And I just want to also send lots of love your way. Whatever you do, please keep doing it. Please keep safe. Please show up for this in the best way that you can. Let me know how I can support you. And yeah, thank you so much for supporting this podcast and listening. Hey everyone, as you know, I always love starting my interviews on a giggle. And I definitely did with this one. So funny. We were just, saying hello to each other, and then my doorbell rang, and then I needed to move the puppy over. But I feel like the best interviews begin with a little bit of chaos magic. And I'm super excited to speak to Adrienne Sloan today. We've been working together which was such a blessing, honestly, and I will say more about that as we kind of speak and share experiences. But I'm just so happy to know Adrienne, and I have some really exciting questions to ask, and it's also the first interview that I'll be doing in a slightly different format with some new introduction questions. So Adrienne, thank you so much for the work that you do and for being here. I'm really, really happy and excited to speak to you. There's a real sense of joy even in these times. Recording on the Taurus new moon. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here and be in conversation with you.
Yay. So I would love to start by asking you what kind of rituals give you comfort at the moment?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, in the moment, the rituals currently that bring me comfort are the ones that are the most easeful. I feel like in the recent weeks and maybe months now, finding ways to incorporate my daily connecting in with the ancestors always brings me. That's part of my ritual, and it continues to shift and look different based on kind of my energy level and where I'm at. So there's a wide range of invitation to, like, when I'm cooking, when I'm just doing some daily tasks, and right now planting seeds in the garden and watering the garden, being with the land, and just bringing a lot of intention and um, calling them in to be present with me and listening. So it's, yeah, a lot of daily task ritual.
Me too. That's making sense. That's beautiful. My next question could be really big, so really feel free to take this any way you like. I'm open to all kinds of answers, but I'm wondering what you're grieving at the moment.
Mm. Yeah. So many things right now. And also I feel like that grief, that presence of grief seems part of that first question of ritual of acknowledging first that there is just most of what I'm sensing and listening in with the land, with the ancestors and the collective right now is just this complexity of grief. So it feels challenging to tease it apart, like um, what actually I'm grieving. But I think some of it, like, it's interesting just in what came up for me right now is that there's also this bit of joy in that grief, of as much heaviness and anger and sadness I have about what's happening in the world right now. There's this thread of joy that I feel is connected with the grief of knowing that this world could be different. We could live in different ways, be received differently, and how we bring our gifts forward and just how we relate with the land and the ancestors. So there feels in that grieving that there's some possibility of, like, hope and joy wrapped into, like, this unknown space. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that just came through.
No, that totally makes sense, and I think it's a beautiful way of describing how joy and grief are so close sometimes. I feel that too, and it feels hard to describe or really put into words sometimes because I think there's also the spiritual bypassing and this like forced positivity that I can't hold right now and find really irritating. But actually, it is true that there's also moments of joy and seeing really, yeah, change that we haven't thought was possible. And hoping that we are at least so together in this experience of grief in a way that we haven't been before, or that maybe we have only been in little pockets of communities before.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like that so many of us, whether we acknowledge it or not, have been grieving for maybe most
Mhm,
of our life for
mhm.
these ways. So I think that's why that piece came through, was that more and more that we acknowledge our grief for how long we've actually been grieving or putting a name to certain types of grief.
Mhm,
But yeah, it's
mhm,
complex and ongoing.
mhm. Yeah, and then the fuzziness of anticipatory grief as well, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
knowing that there's so much yet to come that we can't really see or understand yet, but we already have a sense that it could be really difficult. I
Yeah.
also said, like, I think anticipatory overwhelm should also be a thing because there will also be this transition back into a life without social distancing, for example. And I know this is like a minor problem right now, and I don't want to whinge about it, but I'm also like, oh, I'm just adjusting to this way of being, and then there will be this other way of being, and then who knows how many ways of being I'm gonna live through in this lifetime. Mm.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to hear a little bit more about the work that you do now that we've opened with these really big questions. I would love to ground a little bit and hear more about how you describe your work. I really love your website, and I super recommend people check it out as a soothing experience. Even if nothing else, it's so lovely to look at. It's just like,
Thank you. Yeah, this question, without going on a ramble, but I've been having a difficult time in the last few weeks of just pinpointing these identities of like what do I do? Like how do I describe what I'm doing? Because it continues to shift. But how I'm framing it currently is that I'm supporting mostly folks who are visionary, creatives, activists, um, to really cultivate a deep connection with their ancestors and with the other than humans, and really to spend a lot more time becoming comfortable in the imaginal realm. So in these spaces of experiencing nonlinear time, and also in that trusting in the process and what they're receiving. And I do as much as I can to encourage folks to let it be really awkward, and to remind them that it's a reclaiming of a way of being in relationship, and that it takes time, it takes practice and devotion to that journey. And yeah, it doesn't have to look any one way. And that's something I'm really big on right now too, is just supporting the people that I get to be in connection with in this way, that they're not going to mess it up. They're not going to mess up their relationship, and that there's no one right way to develop these relationships. And so there's some parameters and structure, but it's not a lot of difference between how we relate with other humans. And yeah, I feel like this is a really, for the times we're in and beyond, to kind of decentralize like human relationships as the like most important, valuable relationships in our life. And so it can be messy and but really fun and sweet too. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. I was doing jazz hands and nodding excitedly as you said, to decenter our human relationships, which I think isn't even a choice right now, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, it's just happening, and we're forced to look at what that could look like and how it could be really beautiful and really good, and how we can create intimacy and connection with the non-human world. Yeah. And I also, as someone who has worked with you, feel like want to say it can be awkward, but also it can be so fun. I didn't feel awkward at all. I thought, and I felt it was very immediate and very beautiful and very exploratory and fun, and yeah, didn't feel awkward at all, and just felt really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, there's no end to what it can look like and feel like. And, coming back to that question on grief, I feel like that's always present at times too in ancestor work. Like there's these moments of deep joy and connection, and then waves of grief that come through of missing having our more animist ways intact for a lot of us, and connection with elders. And yeah, I think this is a perfect time for quarantine times that we're in to begin cultivating a practice, because like you said, yeah, we can't hang out with each other in person. And it was interesting in the beginning of all this, when there was that big rush of everyone offering all the things on Zoom, and it was both really sweet to see like what creative offerings people were gathering to share with each other. But I was also like, wait, this is also a huge invitation for us to connect in with the ancestors, with the land where we're at, with spirit, however you want to name these other beings. So I thought that was interesting, both really sweet and like going, okay, we're so conditioned to find ways to still stay in connection just with human to
Mm-hmm.
human,
Mm-hmm.
which is both great. And also
Mm-hmm.
I'm more
Mm-hmm.
prone to the ancestor, like other than human realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was definitely overwhelming. I know exactly what you mean. I also was super touched and overjoyed to see the creativity, not just in the offerings themselves, but also the ways that we shared them and still do. And I still have intentions to participate sometimes, but also really finding that, yeah, there could be beauty in not trying to fill the void immediately and just being with the discomfort and the aloneness. Like I'm living alone, and I have lived alone. How long is it? I don't know. I've totally
Right.
lost track of time now. I just looked at the calendar. I don't know. I think probably 7 weeks now, because anyway, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But yeah, you're totally right. And I'm interested to see where that's heading overall. And yeah, I wonder, maybe could you describe for us what you understand animism to be for those who don't know?
Yeah. Yeah. Animism, I define as a range of just being in connection with the other than human realm, so that there's animate life, like the stones, the water, the ancestors are included in that there's just a wider web of beings that have just as much input and available connection for us than humans. So it's, it's the waters, its elements, its place. And yeah, just I see animism as is really like a foundation way of being in relationship, of again, it's a helpful way of being in connection that's not ascribed to any particular like religion or spiritual like path like that has like structure or dogma to it. It's just kind of how I see my relationship, um with the other than humans. I like it because it doesn't have like it's this or not this. It just feels like
Mhm.
it's really expansive in
Mhm.
that. I don't think I did that justice, but it's hard to explain. I feel like
No, yeah.
but really, yeah, it's just, like just being with all the beings, like the weather is a
Mhm.
being. Um, and just how do we honor those relationships, connect, cultivate that, be in reciprocity with all these beings on a daily basis.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's such a beautiful starting point for people to explore what it means to them. Yeah. Um, I wonder what it was like to study embodied ecology. I looked at your website about page and I was like, ooh, first of all, can I understand? I don't really understand what a liberal arts college is. Does it mean it's something you do after high school and it's liberal because, I mean, is it politically liberal? Like, or is it liberal in that you can liberally study all the different art subjects?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I've never really thought about that. Well, it's interesting that, so this was my undergrad, post high school, with some space in between. I wasn't a
Mhm.
traditional um, student necessarily, but the particular, and some folks in the US may know this college, it's the Evergreen State College, and it was formed in the 60s. So it was like in that time, it's very non-traditional in that there's no grades. There's not really like majors per se. So like what I put on there as far as like trying to describe like what did I study do, like you didn't have to claim any kind of major. You were evaluated by your faculty, and you also self-evaluated like your work. And it was very interdisciplinary in that we didn't choose individual classes. So we chose, like I did like dance, music, theater for a year. And it had a particular name, and it had multiple teachers that came together to like form that. So it was very, there was organic farming. There was just, it was kind of a big hippie school. But so, I think that's the only way they could really describe it. Again, we didn't have yeah, it was mostly just a liberal arts, I guess. Yeah, just studying interdisciplinary. So when I tried to reflect, I'm like, what did I actually do? um, yeah, that's where I started to study Buto, which I feel like was that's a modern Japanese dance form that came about post World War II. And actually, it was one of the first experiences for me of just being really embodied and not having it like, I wonder if I can back up like as
Yeah.
I'm explaining this. Um, so before I went to that school and that program, my grandmother passed away, and it was the first person that I was close to that died. And at the time that she was still in the hospital, I had a friend visiting from Australia, and it was somebody when I was younger, we had traveled and met this person and many others. And I was really just in deep grief about my grandmother, and but also knowing that this person is probably somebody that I wouldn't see again. It was just random. They happened to be close to me and they're from Australia. And so I took them out to this land that was really important to me with these big trees. This was in Washington State in the Northwest, and in November. And so I was really present with, what I was feeling with my grandmother. But there was this moment that the wind picked up, and there were these big leaf maple trees where the leaves are about the size of your face. And because it was fall and the wind was happening, they just started raining down all around us. And I had this experience that I was this little girl and she was with me as a little girl. And it was just like we were crying and just laughing and chasing the leaves. And in that moment, I knew that she was like transitioning and leaving her body. And also, I had this really profound knowing that like she disappeared into the land, into what we consider nature, and it was almost like a portal for, like, she opened that, like her death created some way for us to always be in connection, and it was to be with the trees and the land. And but in that, I can't remember now because this was about 20-ish years ago, but there was this big impulse to dance. I had this, like, it was almost like a voice was like, you're supposed to dance. And I was like, what does that mean? I had no real understanding of, like, I didn't have a background in dance. I was never like put into dance classes as a child. So I was, in my early 20s, and I was like, kind of sent me on a mission, which, coming back to like evergreen and my liberal arts experience, was what I attempted to explore there. And so that dance form of Buto is really, when I found that, because I went to ballet, I went to all these like known types of dance first to be like, what do people do? Like, what is, I didn't really have an understanding of what I was supposed to do. But when I found that form of movement and being embodied, it has so much to do, looking back, with animism and ritual and being in cultivating relationship with other than humans. So it was a long story to get to that point, but I feel like it all kind of
Mm-hmm.
yeah, connects in that way.
Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. I got a bit teary here, and I can totally see the dancing and the leaves and how that all fits together. And I'm so glad that you had this beautiful educational experience, because I think, yeah, it sounds like a lot of freedom and like something that was happening just at the right time. I was an older student too, and I also didn't choose a major. I didn't go to quite as hippie a school, unfortunately. But I did my first degree at the distance university, where you could each term kind of choose something else. And I loved doing that so much. I did a lot of creative writing and social science and psychology and child development and all these different things. And it was so fun. I really think that more people would really love doing that, and it should be more of a thing.
Yeah, yeah, I do too.
Mm-hmm.
I think for even folks that might not be aware of that is possible, but those
Mm-hmm.
types of ways of learning really spoke to me, because I was a pretty wild teenager, and I didn't I barely graduated high school, and
Mhm.
I was the first person in my family to go to college, so I didn't have a lot of like adult direction on what I was doing or what my options were. And when I found that school, I was like, okay, I think I could first get in.
Mhm.
I'm like, I think they will accept me. I hadn't taken, the traditional testing that many high school students do here, to get into college. And it was a state school, which was really, it still is a state school, but the tuition was really affordable as well. So yeah, I was like, maybe, maybe this will work for me. But it's important to find what works, I think, for us educational,
Mhm.
on that path,
Mhm.
how we learn and engage. Yeah.
Mhm. Same to everything. I am also the first child in my family and also didn't have a lot of guidance and kind of figured it out as I went along.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more how you then became a therapist and how that's tying into the work that you're doing now? And ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, I was such a reluctant therapist to be to go down. I mean, I still am. I have a hard time with Western psychology, but actually, it was at that school because as I was doing that form of dance, Buto, I also discovered dance and movement as a like therapeutic modality, and so I explored that a bit because I was really into nonverbal forms of healing. And so talk therapy was never like something I was really drawn to. And so it was about 10 years after that. I worked in the service industry for years just because I couldn't commit to any like real job. And I was bartending. And at some point, I think part of it was like ego based, and that I was like in my 30s and I was like, maybe I should like go back to school, or what am I doing? Am I gonna be a bartender for this? Which is, there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think it was just, I was, just going through that, like, what am I doing? And I wanted to engage too in something that had more creative, creative space. And just like, I felt like I was here to do more than just, serve drinks to people. Um, and so so I had another, just like the dance, like calling, the other calling I had was to be with horses. And it was another one that just came out of like, I was like, what? Like, I didn't know. It was just these threads that I kept following. And so I didn't know much about horses either. I had ridden horses as a child. When I went to visit my cousins who lived in the country, and they'd always put me on the like slow older horse and I would fall off. So I didn't have really like a path of like what that meant. And so I started exploring, and because I was bartending, I had flexibility and schedule, and I started just finding different people to give me lessons on writing. And there was still something missing. I was like, this isn't quite it. It's like not about writing. And I actually was volunteering at a horse rescue and I was injured. I tore a ligament in my knee. Just this really, it's one of those moments where you're like, I shouldn't do this. And then I let somebody else that didn't kind of see what happened encourage me to do this thing that I ended up getting hurt with. So it was a big lesson in trusting your own uh, knowing of what to do. But so I was laid up for a few weeks and I couldn't walk. So I had a lot of time to stay in bed and do some research. And I found this whole world of equine facilitated learning and mental health and partnering with horses as a therapeutic way of deepening relationship and healing. And it blew me away. I was like, oh, okay. Like, so I started looking and I found another kind of school that fit my style of learning. And it was a graduate program in counseling psychology, but there was an option to do equine therapy. And I was like, okay, I can maybe be a therapist if I could be outside and also be with the horses. So I I followed that pathway.
That is so beautiful. I really, really loved hearing that. And I feel that your connection to animals and the landscape really comes through your online work as well. So I don't feel like there's been a big split. It still feels so integrated in everything that you do. So would you like maybe like to tell us a little bit more about how you're staying connected at this time, or in general, like what are practices that you like doing when you're missing the landscape or wanting something really specific that you need support around, or how do you like to give back, like what makes it reciprocal for you?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a question hopefully we're always checking in with for ourselves of that reciprocity. And, currently too, just with the heaviness that's happening for so many of us, especially those of us that feel like or identify more as highly sensitive, um, it feels difficult for me to stay connected, as we talked about in the beginning, to some of the rituals or some of the ways that I was tending as much. And so I'm trying to take that pressure off myself and make it really um, find the most simple, most easeful thing that I can be um, present with. And right now, in the place that I live, I have access to this beautiful garden. That's the second year of having this garden. And so right now, like last year, my partner and I put the garden in, and the land had a garden there like 40 years prior. So it had known that. And also, this is indigenous land. I live currently between two Tewa pueblos. And so it's interesting. I don't know if this is answering the question, but there's complexity here also in that I live on a seasonal river in that valley, and across from the river, which is also tribal land, is they call them barrancas, but they're these sandstones, kind of sculptured, um, I guess rocks, just different layers of geology. But you can find fossils from 10, 15 million years ago. So, and then in the garden, as I'm um, planting, mostly last year, but even this year, pottery will arise from digging in the land. And just so it's interesting. And just being aware of the stories that are held within the land and time. And part of my reciprocity is just bringing so much acknowledgement to the complexities of both humans that have been on this land, and giving respect to the ancestors of place, and to those older deep time beings um, that were here before humans. So, and that comes really present to me almost every time I'm outside. So I feel like, and I think for most of the people that I work with too, I'm always trying to encourage having that as a starting place too, of just being in really deep awareness, deep um, intention with the places that we call home or that we wander in our lives. And they also have this beautiful tree that I call the prayer tree. And so, putting offerings on that tree as well for just the spirits of the land, and which can include, water, flowers, foods, um, notes, handwritten notes. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I answered the question.
No, you did. No, yeah, absolutely. I think there were some really beautiful pictures and practices. And I also just again want to say how beautiful the pictures are you take on in the landscape that you're in. I think there's a very particular color palette that I don't see around here very much. And it's always really interesting. And I really want to lean into the beauty of being able to connect online and being able to show each other the things that we can see in our own little worlds right now. That feels really special. And I want to, of course, grieve in some way that I probably won't be traveling again the way we have in the past anymore, but also yeah, the joy of like having all these other ways of learning about each other's worlds is so beautiful.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, thinking about that too with the grief of, so much intention of wanting to see and be on different lands, especially ancestral lands for me too, of being
Hmm.
really intentional on, the lands where you live and Northern Ireland and places that I had hoped to spend more time in,
Hmm.
that unknown of like whether or not we'll be able to do that in the near future or what that looks like. But
Hmm.
yeah, I love this land so much, and this is not where I was raised, but I feel very um, like it speaks really loudly here. And so
Hmm.
I do my best to, share that in that medium of, I love capturing those images and being able to share with people at the land, like how it's speaking through the images.
And it does. I can hear it even over here.
Yeah.
Is there something else that you would like to say to people that maybe are listening to all of this and are like, oh gosh, I really want that too? That feels so comforting and beautiful and like something really real to lean into right now. Like, what might be a good starting point for them?
Yeah. So many starting points. I think, yeah, for anyone listening that's curious about connecting in with their ancestors, in particular, that to just to bring it back to the awkwardness that I spoke of earlier, of really being, that you can't mess up that relationship, and it can look like so many different things, and to spend more time in spaces that are off screens, even if you don't have access to land right now and you're in this quarantined in home places. No matter where you're at, we can shift our consciousness into these other realms. And it can be challenging for sure. I think a lot of times people dismiss their ability to relate or connect because they either feel they're not intuitive or they feel like nothing's happening. Um, and time operates, I feel, differently in those realms. And so, one thing that I tell people I work with a lot too is that when we're in these spaces and we're asking for messages or asking for, anything that might be on our heart, we don't always get immediate like answers in the moment. And if we don't, because we're so conditioned to like get things in these immediate ways, that we can easily think, oh, it's not working, or I can't do it, or my ancestors don't want to connect with me. Right. So it's to have more tenacity in the way that it becomes a devotional practice. And that, how I see it, is that we're really casting out, we're calling out to them, and we have to keep doing that, and to let go of the control of like when it comes back to us. And then to make sure, one thing that's been really big on my heart in the last several months is that for many of us, it can be difficult to receive. So paying attention to that when it does come back to us, and it might come back to us in ways that we didn't expect, um, that to just be aware and be conscious of like how it might come through, like different signs. There might be this impulse to grab a certain book and look at a certain chapter that you haven't even thought about in a long time, to even be on the computer and Google something, things that just start coming to us, to also see that those might be spirit and the ancestors speaking to us in these ways that we can receive, and then to make sure we actually accept it and receive it, right? And not push it away or not dismiss like, oh, it's just me thinking of that thing. To really see ourselves as a multiplicity of selves and beings and time. And and I think we have I know everyone's situation's different. Like some folks have maybe less, even if they're quarantined, might have less like solitude or alone time right now, if they have children or partners, or just what their spaces look like. But yeah, to really cultivate a practice of more solitude so that you can actually hear the ancestors and hear the other than humans, because we can't when we're busy being distracted by screens or just human chatter.
Yes, I love how you describe that. I love the devotion piece so much because I think it kind of lets our busy monkey minds off the hook as well. Like I feel when I'm not in devotion, I need to kind of be more controlling of the process or think it through more, overthink it all the time. And I think devotion is just dropping into my heart and being like, I know what my intention is. I know what I'm here to do. I just keep showing up the best way I can. That's all I have to do. So easy in a way.
Yeah, I know we forget the easiest thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. And I love what you said about time as well. I think that we're often very attached to linear outcomes or linear processes and a very, very straightforward A to B narrative. And it is it is very nonlinear and spiral sometimes, and that's okay. And I also feel, yeah, the ease that comes in if we don't have to figure out exactly what something means or where it's coming from, just accepting that there can be so many different truths at the same time. And I don't feel so attached to this distinction between imagination and reality, for example, like that just doesn't feel useful to me. And so I don't want to reject any beauty that comes to me by saying, oh, that's just imagined, because that doesn't really make it any less real. Um and also I feel there is some liberation in just being humble as a human and saying, there's so much I don't know that I can't ever say this is just imagined. I don't know. And I'm quite happy that I don't know. That's really
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah. I love that, Yarrow. Yeah, I think that's the other piece to it too. It really is just being in that space of being playful and curious and not judging yourself. And again, seeing this as, for most of us, we're going to be reclaiming these ways of being. So to be really gentle in the process for
Mhm,
ourselves and be open and curious and find our own kind of style of, just like in relationships, like how we show up for our relationships. And yeah, but mostly, yeah, like hearing yourself say prayers out loud to the ancestors and to the land. It could just be the sweetest, most simple thing. And as you were speaking about time, one thing I always encourage people to, and they're like, how do I weave this into my daily life? Because it
mhm.
can feel sometimes like another task, like, oh, I gotta connect with the ancestors, or try to make a big deal, or it has to be some huge ritual or ceremony. And it can be if if you want that. um but even like taking 1 minute, like just choosing, like for a week, if it's the morning, afternoon, evening, of being dedicated to dropping in and connecting in that way, in those shifted spaces of consciousness. Like 1 minute can feel like a lifetime. So
Mhm,
to just not feel like you have to spend hours and hours, unless it's just and then eventually, right, and it becomes so second nature. So you're washing the dishes, or you're feeling them more and more present with you. And just one thing I'd like to add to that for anyone, especially in these times that we're living, is to call in those elevated, well-seated ones in your lineages who also lived through these times of crisis, of unknown, of maybe scarcity of food, or just whatever is present for you. There's likely many, many ancestors available to you to just hold that space. Like, they don't have to do anything or give you any like specific guidance, though they might, but
mhm,
to just ask them to be holding you in your grief and just wherever you're at with,
mhm.
yeah, with these times. So that can be a helpful practice right now too.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. Before we go, can you share with us what you're currently offering and where people can find you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I offer individual sessions for folks doing ancestral support. So that can look like a many different things. I feel like it's a blend of counseling and ancestral healing work. And really, it's the ancestors as our therapists, essentially. And I'm guiding that process. I also have an online group membership, and that's a really sweet way for people. Just it's more affordable, and it's, I'm guiding people a couple times a month in an ancestral connection circle. So doing these, guided drop-ins and just cultivating relationship, just exploring different things of grief, of embodying our gifts from our lineages and healing our lineages in those ways. So that's something I'm going to be opening up here for people to register for in May. And then I have so many other things on my heart that I want to do, like workshops, so that I'm hoping in May those will all come about. But people can go to my website, join my newsletter, and that's where I'll let people know. Or on Instagrams.
Cool. I'll link to all of that in the show notes as well. So if someone didn't catch that, it'll be there to find you. Adrienne, thank you so, so much for everything that you shared today. It was truly beautiful to speak to you. And I'm so excited to share your message and your work and this interview, especially at this time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yarrow.